name is Matt Whitman. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast, and I would like to share with you, my friends, one of my super secret favorite social things that happens. I love the moment where you are in a dynamic, multifaceted social situation with people you know really well, people you don't know very well, people who maybe are pursuing different goals than you're pursuing. You got all these people in a room. Maybe it's a party or a board meeting or a social setting or whatever, and you're all firing back and forth, and you know who your allies are, and you can see that they're catching certain things, and you know because of all the history you have with your good friends who are there in the room with you that they're registering stuff too, and you just cannot wait to talk. And then finally, the whole thing ends, and you're like, hey, you want to just grab a cup of coffee or drink or something real quick? And they're like, yeah, sure. And you're all casual about it because there's still people around. And then you go to the place, and you're like, dude, did you see that thing? Sister, did you hear when that guy said that thing? And you just cannot wait to turn over every single card. Be like, okay, when you were there and the two ladies came over and they were talking to you about the meeting and you said the thing, were you totally thinking? And you're like, yes, I was. And I so wanted to tell you what I was doing there, but you played it exactly right. I love that after the fact debriefing strategy session where you turn over all the cards and you ask your question like, well, what were you doing there? What was the play? What was the angle? What were you thinking? And frankly, I love the fact that all the people from the other group who all knew each other really well probably also went out and got drinks or made s'mores and talked about everything. We're trying to figure out what we were doing and what's going on. There's nothing weird about that. That's cool, and it's fun to get together with people who are really artful socially and excellent at nuanced communication and get to that place where you just blow off steam and you're like, oh, okay, let's break everything down. Not so much so that we can win the night, but just because it's fun to unpack all of the moves and everything that was going on there. So imagine Matthew chapter 13, where Jesus has been hanging out with this inner circle of guys, the disciples, and they've got miles on the tires. It doesn't seem like, I mean, to you and me, it seems like we've been doing this Matthew 13 thing, you know, for whatever we're at now, a year and 3 months, but we're only 13 chapters in. I mean, it's only second year, it's only that many pages. That is the number of pages that it is. It doesn't sound like very much. It's been really quick. But a lot of time has elapsed here. These guys have been on hikes for like a year. Think about how much you connect with people when you go on a hike. Then you get to the deepest level of the soul over one campfire. How many campfires have these guys shared? And they are in the trenches together. They've gone to war together. They've been run off together. They've faced death together at the hands of nature and threats of death at the hands of people who used to be allies. These guys are back to back, shoulder to shoulder, but also the disciples still don't totally understand their leader. They don't totally have an answer to the question they asked when they were out in the boat all the way back in chapter 8, right? Chapter 8, I think, when they're like, who is this that even the winds and the waves obey him? They're still hesitant to even admit it. So they got all this history, but their relationship is still pregnant with anticipation about what exactly it is that we're doing here and who exactly is this guy we're following around and what exactly happens next. And so the disciples admire Jesus and they respect Jesus and they are totally in on this thing, but also they're going to have questions. And so the first two great speeches around which the book of Matthew is structured, they would have understood or had a chance to follow up on. The first one is the Sermon on the Mount, and that was directed at the disciples. It says Jesus took his disciples up on the mountain and started teaching them about stuff, and the crowds just happened to come along. So all three members of the audience are there, the people who are in, the people who are out and angry, and the squishy middle who aren't sure what to make of it. They're all there for the Sermon on the Mount. It's very overt, right through the front door kind of theological language. But then Matthew chapter 10, the second of the great 5 speeches around which the book of Matthew is structured, is the missional discourse. And that's just for the disciples. Like, hey, you got an open world quest. It's dangerous to go alone. Take this. And he sends them out to do this stuff and tells them exactly how things are going to be in the immediate term, the medium term, and the long term. But now we get to a weird place because Matthew 13, the kingdom parables discourse, the third of the 5 great speeches around which the book of Matthew is structured, is bisected right down the middle in terms of who Jesus is talking to. The first 33 verses of Matthew 13 involve the crowds. Remember, Matthew 13 starts like this. That same day, Jesus went out of the house and sat by the lake. Such large crowds gathered around him that he got into a boat and sat in it while all the people stood on the shore. Then he told them many things in parables, saying, and he tells them the parable of the sower, with the seeds just go wherever, and 3 of the 4 soil types don't work out. And then he talks a little bit about why he's actually teaching in parables in a brief sidebar with the disciples who pull him aside and are like, hey, why are you teaching them all in the parables like this? And he answers that, and then it looks like he's heads up from the sidebar with the disciples and right back to the crowds, talking about this parable of the wheat and the weeds. And then from there, it says he told them another parable. Them would still refer to the crowds. If we go back and look at, what do you call that, the antecedents, if we look at all the stuff that came before, and he tells them the parable of the mustard seed. And then it says he told them still another parable in verse 33. So we're still talking to the same group, the crowds. That would include some people who like him, some people who don't, but mostly the big squishy middle. And this one is about the yeast. And then in verse 34, the bisection happens. And now we're no longer talking in a boat in front of everybody. The scene shifts. Verse 34. Jesus spoke all these things to the crowd in parables. He didn't say anything to them without using a parable. So was fulfilled what was spoken through the prophet. I will open my mouth in parables. I will utter things hidden since the creation of the world. Then he left the crowd and went into the house, and his disciples came to him and said, explain to us the parable of the weeds in the field. No, of course, they're not going to have any questions about the parable of the sower because Jesus explained the parable of the sower, and it looks like they didn't have any questions about the parable of the mustard seed and the parable of the yeast. They seem to get it. They don't have any questions about that. But they're like, the wheat and the weeds one. What exactly do we do with that? What are we supposed to take with that? Paraphrase is mine. And we'll get into exactly Jesus' answer to them next time around. But this time around, what I think is interesting is that the first 2 of 5 great big speeches of Jesus around which the book of Matthew is structured both have a targeted audience, and the same group is there for the whole time. Number 1, it's directed at the disciples, but Jesus knows there's a whole bunch of there taking it in as well. Number 2, the missional discourse is entirely directed at the disciples for the purposes of them being sent out on the big open world quest. But Matthew 13, the kingdom parables discourse, it's half and half. The first half is to explain to the squishy middle how the kingdom is going to play out. And this is not speculative. This is overt because it's what verse 10 and forward through verse 17 explains here in the kingdom parable, knowing fully that some of these people are going to have their eyes and ears open to understand the parable and get it and be like, well, I get how the kingdom is now. That was like my last question that I didn't understand. Now it's all come together. I'm totally in. And they move from the squishy middle to the in group. And that other people were going to have their eyes and ears shut, and they were going to look at it and be like, I don't think this is real. I don't think this is for me. Maybe I'm just going to go to the casual disinterested group, or maybe I'll even sign up to join the raging, riotous, angry group that wants to kill people because of how much they hate Jesus. So in the first half of the parable, you get the whole room. The full social dynamic is going on. Maybe everybody's got their little swirly drinks and their fancy outfits on, and they're all playing the game and doing the social thing with each other and trying to read each other and play their cards right. And then the metaphorical party wraps up, and then Jesus gets out of the boat, and real on the subtle is like, hey, you guys want to hang out or something? Just go, whatever. And they're like, oh, yeah, we do, for sure. And they all go sidle off to where they're going to hang out privately, which is the house. The house, anytime we're around Capernaum, as referenced in Matthew 13:36 here, probably refers to Peter's house, or the place where Jesus healed Peter's mother-in-law. So they all go in there and like, okay, bye-bye. Bye-bye, crowds. Thank you. Yes, it was a great day. Okay, bye-bye. Take care. Click. Okay, you got to tell us what that parable was about. I understood the first one and the one about the seeds, the yeast, or whatever. I think that was fine. But the one in the middle that you told about where the people came and sabotaged the field, I have to know. What did that mean? That's how the dynamic feels. And that's really fun to me that they just can't wait to get in there and talk about it. It's also really fun to me that they know how to be wingmen. They're like, it really wouldn't help things right now to question the master in front of everybody, or to be like, well, actually, Peter here, Capernaum, I have a question. It seems like the better way to tell but no, there's no impetuousness. There's no showing him up. There's humility, and there's this bated breath anticipation to get the actual story as to what was really going on with that. And again, I keep teasing it, but we are getting very, very close to Jesus answering the question. So the 2 dynamics that really intrigue me here is one, the social dynamic of we're in front of everybody and we're just listening and being cool and transitioning to saying goodbye to everyone. And we just cannot wait to unpack and debrief everything that happened. It's just a very beautifully human moment here between Jesus and the disciples. And I can relate to it and I love it. And the second dynamic that we didn't get to unpack today, but we'll unpack tomorrow, is this one where, once again, Matthew follows his format of saying, there was this thing spoken in days of yore, and now it has been fulfilled in your hearing with Jesus. And then we have to put in a little bit of work to try and make sure we understand the connection and what's going on there, even though I don't think the original audience would have had to put in that much work at all, because I think it would have been really obvious to them. So Matthew 13, the Kingdom Parables Discourse, this is unprecedented territory. This is a great big speech of Jesus, but half of it's directed to one group, and then it carries right over into the after party, and the other half is directed at another group, and we're going to have to keep that in mind as we unpack the rest of this business. Hey, huge thanks once again to everybody who jumped in to support the program this week at patreon.com/the TMBH I'm putting together a cool little recycled paper, fit in your pocket field notes book. This is Matthew on it that you can use as a complement to what we're doing here in these conversations. I'm going to send that to literally everybody who is supporting the program when that mailing goes out at literally any level, just to say thank you, because this thing exists because of you. So I'll say it again now. Thank you. All right, I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.